Welcome to Black and Brown Crowns, the show where beautiful Black and brown women speak about their career experiences. I'm Shyanne, your host, and today we'll be discussing what it's like to travel down the math career path with Professor Dr. Adams. Again, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing, Dr. Adams?
I am doing very well, and I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So how did you start in your math career? How did you go about that?
Sure. So I always really liked math growing up. I was just one of those people. It made a lot of sense to me. So I decided to keep going with it. And I ended up focusing on math to some degree in college. But I knew that I didn't want to be like an academic mathematician, if that makes sense. I knew I didn't want to continue down a graduate career focused in math specifically. And it wasn't until college that I got involved in research. And, I had been maintaining like a major in math and also in psychology. And through kind of a perfect storm, I ended up starting to get involved in research and seeing that that was a way that I could use numbers and math and statistics to apply to real world problems and apply to concepts and theories that I was learning in psychology. And I thought, wow, this is a place where I can marry these interests, where I can work directly with people, but still maintain this research arm that's relying on statistics and numbers and this other piece that I'm really interested in.
So further, before you got into college, did you always know that you wanted to do math, or was this something that came along later on in life?
So it wasn't something that I always knew I would be involved in. I jumped around as a kid. I think the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to be a journalist.
Same.
I think it was because growing up, I used to watch 2020 with my grandma a lot. And so Barbara Walters, everything. So I wanted to be a journalist. And then partway through, I, for some reason, ended up switching and I thought I would be a lawyer. And I took a psychology class in high school, a 2-year psychology kind of curriculum in high school. And I really, really liked it. I just didn't know what you would do with psychology.
Same.
Yeah. And so it wasn't until I really, it truly was getting to college and seeing psychology as an applied science that I started to think about, okay, this is actually a career path that I really can still do this math thing that I really like, but wasn't planning to kind of continue on in, but that I really could kind of marry all of those interests together. So for me, math was always just one of those things that I really liked. It was fun, but I had not really anticipated that I would be using it a lot in my actual career.
So it sounded like, just as normal teenagers or normal kids, like you go through life saying, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. And then it's not until you get into a class or go to a club to where you're like, okay, now this is actually what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely true. And really, I think one of the things that I've taken away from my experience is it's okay to have interests that are in a couple of different buckets, because it turns out there are oftentimes ways to merge those buckets and get to take pieces of them into the thing that you end up doing, even if you didn't anticipate that going in.
Yeah, I can say that for me, my interest was being a writer, and then it changed once I got into high school and was like, okay, I can't really do much about writing, because going into college, you have to really work a long time to get to best-selling books, best-selling author, blah, blah, blah. So that changed my career path. And then I was like, you know what? I want to do vet. Nope. I don't like all types of animals. So I said, not going to do that. So then I actually got into college and said, okay, I want to try psych. And I stuck with it. But it wasn't until sophomore year where I said, okay, this is actually something I want to do because I like to research. And psychology, you research. Well, there's a part of psychology where you research, and that was my bread and butter, was research. So I
Yeah.
stuck with it. And then now here I am, which is completely different from psych, and hosting a whole podcast. So everything is just different. But
Yeah.
hopefully, I get back to being traveling down that career path as a writer.
Yeah.
Um
But even still, I would imagine that you're drawing on skills that you've picked up along the way in all of your different endeavors and applying them. It just doesn't look exactly like the way that you might have written it up.
exactly. I know that at least within journalism, it's like researching about a specific topic and even writing, which in psych, you are researching about different topics and there's a lot of writing. So they all like mesh together well. And, I mean, again, it's not the exact career path that I thought I would be in, but it's through life that you figure things out together. So here we are.
Absolutely.
So from high school, so we're just going to trail through. You said, okay, well, maybe math, but also psych, and then you go into college. Were there any specific scholarships that you looked into, or internships or fellowships that you got into that helped you along the way to getting to the career path you were in?
Yeah. So I would say certainly I'm definitely a beneficiary of a lot of people's goodwill and a lot of people's good coin along the way, for
Yeah.
sure. I I was lucky for my undergraduate career at University of Richmond. I was lucky to be on two scholarships, two merit-based scholarships that really covered most of the cost of college. And one of them, oh, I feel like I'm giving away my age a little bit. One of them used to be called the Oliver Hill Scholarship, but now it might still be called the Cigna Scholars Program. Um, but one of the wonderful things that those scholarships afforded me, aside from paying for college, was also the chance to have some summer pay to actually do research. So I was really fortunate to get some paid hands-on experience over my summers in college, where I didn't have to worry about working another job or doing something like that. I could really focus on getting research experience and seeing what that process looks like, which gave me
Mhm.
more of a firsthand experience, which I really appreciated, because it really gave me that bug for, oh, I like this. And I'm pulling on my math and I'm pulling on my, you know, social issues that I really care about and pulling on my
Yeah.
psychology. All of it's working together. So really those helped out a ton to be able to have devoted time to volunteering and research.
That's good to hear, because I know there are a lot of just rather high schoolers, or even sometimes even in middle school and in college, where people are looking for scholarships or internships and they can't find any, although everyone says, oh, there's scholarships out there. It's like, okay, but where? And I need to, like get those exact pieces, because although you're saying that there are scholarships out there, I can't really see and or find those scholarships. So if you can help me, then I can get to where I want to be. So really, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. How, like, once you got into this career field, is it something where you had to have a degree, or was it an option to have a degree and go off of experience? Or like, how did that go? Like, do you need a degree, or are there alternatives to getting into your career path?
Yeah. So I would say for what I do, so I'm situated as a professor in a university, right? So I'm on the tenure track, which means, that I am responsible for maintaining a pretty active research line in addition to my teaching and serving in service in the university. So for what I do in the space that I occupy, you do need to have a PhD. if we were talking about maintaining just the research side of things, then you could do that without having to go all the way to getting a PhD. It probably means that you might not be the principal investigator, kind of primary person getting the grants and operating them, but you could certainly serve on a research team with an undergrad degree or with a master's degree. I think what ends up happening is the level of responsibility and the level of kind of crafting the grants and crafting the research projects that tends to come about more as the education levels go up. But it doesn't mean that you need to have a master's or a PhD to get involved in the research process. There are lots of really excellent project managers, lots of really excellent data analysts, lots of really excellent people who work in different aspects of the research process who don't necessarily have PhDs or graduate degrees. It certainly helps, but it certainly helps if you want to be crafting out as a principal investigator, where you will be applying for research grants and things like that. But if your aim is to work in research, there are so many paths to be able to do that.
There might be people who are listening that are already in this career path, and you said that you would more like, with the job that you're doing now, you're more than likely will need a degree. But there's also the option of not having a degree, but your responsibilities might not be as much. Do you have any advice for those people who might switch in careers?
Yeah, so you're thinking people who would be more doing what I'm doing, like standard university professor, or people who would go and switch over into more just research?
Let's do both.
Okay, yeah, sure. So for my path, so if you're going tenure track, a research active university, then one of the things that you have to start developing is your kind of cohesive path of research, right? So everybody talks about having a coherent, cohesive portfolio of research, meaning that you can dibble and dabble and ask questions in a lot of different domains, but there should be some thread that you follow in your research. So for instance, I do some research in the realm of HIV risk and prevention. I do some research in the realm of chronic pain management, do some research in the realm of how people adapt to things like burn injuries, brain injuries, spinal cord injuries. But all of that is under an umbrella of kind of mental health and functioning as it relates to physical functioning too, right? So you have to have, my advice for somebody who's going to go down that path is that you have to have an idea that kind of propels you forward, that you can make a cohesive story about. Kind of getting back to that journalism piece, right? Like you can do a lot of different things, but you have to be able to craft a narrative that makes sense, because that's one of the things that you end up being judged on when you go up for tenure. The other thing is, for, again, my specific path, university tenure track, you have to also be invested and interested in the other critical elements of the job, right? Teaching. It is, you know, a good chunk of my time and energy is towards my research program, but a huge chunk is towards teaching, both formally in the classroom, but also informally, where I mentor graduate students in their own research process too, right? So if you're gonna go on this path, it means that you have to be interested and devoted to not just the research, but also teaching and teaching other people the research process too. So that would be my advice for people who are going down this specific path, is that, you know, the research is a critical, huge part, and it's important to have your narrative. It's important to have your story about what you do and to have that be your guiding force. But also, you're not going to do well if you don't actually enjoy the teaching part, because you'll be teaching in a lot of different ways, formally and informally. For people who are going pure research, because there is the opportunity and possibility to go and work in research institutes where really that is your job. Your job is either writing grants and getting grants and implementing them, or working on aspects of research that's grant funded. If that is the case, then I would say your duty, your job is to be as informed as possible when it comes to what is happening in the field, which means read. Read the literature that comes out, because science is always changing. Science is always moving forward. And in order to be an active contributor, you have to know what's going on. So if you're not actually reading articles when they come up, if you're not staying abreast of what's going on, then it's really hard to stay up to date and to, continue to make a name for yourself as you're moving forward. That's for both, honestly.
For both being in the university on the tenure track, but also being a researcher.
Yeah, that's just general. If you're gonna be doing any research, you should be reading.
I feel, I personally cannot be a professor because you said you have at least doing university where you have to have that interest in teaching and also mentoring. I know I could do the mentoring part, but the teaching part, no. This podcast is enough for me, but to actually teach people, no. But it's just two different types of things. Like I said, journalism, that's my little bread and butter. Getting back to the work though, how was your typical workload or your typical day look like? Was it too much doing research, rather starting out or in the middle?
So I think it depends, and it has changed over kind of my career. For clinical psychology, which is what I am, I'm a clinical psychologist. Your last year of your doctoral program is a clinical year, right? So I was working full-time in a hospital setting, doing clinical work and desperately trying to build in time to also do research. But my time was really primarily clinical. And then my postdoc, I did a research postdoc for 2 years, and my responsibilities primarily were research focused. But I, again, as a clinical psychologist and as a person who I like to do research in the same realms that I'm interested in clinically. And I believe that being active in both keeps you kind of in the know, and kind of all your skills continue to progress that way. I crafted it so that I think I did clinical work 1 day a week on my postdoc, and I did research the other 4 days. Now, as a professor, it depends. It truly depends. I can say I believe, my understanding is that theoretically half of my time as a tenure track person, half of my time should be devoted to research. I believe something like 40% should be teaching and 10% should be service. That is not how it breaks down in real life.
Okay.
Truly. So it really is. Oh, I'm sorry, actually. Okay, my computer unplugged. How it actually breaks down a typical work week for me, I usually try to craft it so that I teach on 2 days out of the week. So typically I try to stack both of my classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I try to schedule my individual meetings with my graduate students and any undergrads that I'm working with on individual projects. I try to stack those on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Wednesdays are typically full meetings days where I'm in department meetings, program meetings, all kinds of meetings. And Monday and Friday, I try to devote more space and time to research. So I usually have a lab meeting on one of the days, and then really try to buckle down and just knock out big chunks of research on those days. A goal of mine is to write every day, so have something in the research realm every single day. That is challenging depending on the time of year and what else is going on, especially given that, you know, students' thesis and dissertations and all these kinds of things also come into play. But that's kind of a typical week. A typical week is really shifting between teaching, research, mentorship, service, committees, all of these kinds of things.
It sounds like a lot of work, not gonna lie. So how do you manage this?
Yeah, so I will fully transparently, sometimes better than other times. It is a lot. So I think organization is key. I'm a big user of my calendar, especially because I still collaborate with folks who are in other time zones. And so it's taken like 1 or 2 mix-ups related to time zones to really get me to be like, okay, gotta be on top of this. So I'm a big proponent of using that calendar, of blocking time off for required tasks. So like I said, when I talked about trying to build in a little bit of writing time, it's not feasible for me to do research 4 hours every day, as much as I would love to. And so if I've got an hour, if I've got 45 minutes that I can block on my schedule every day, I block those times and I treat those times like a doctor's appointment, right? It means that, no, you might want to schedule a meeting with me, but I'm not going to do it. So I think
said no, this is my time.
It is a no, because I think the biggest, when you have a lot of work to do in general, and especially when it's a lot of shifting different kinds of tasks and meeting with a lot of people who need your time for a variety of reasons, I think one skill that you have to develop is protecting your time, which also is protecting your peace. So I think that is critical. So I've done pretty well, I think, on the work front of that. And I am always continuing to try to craft that and evolve it for my personal life too, right? To protect my time, because time is the thing, right? Like we've got a limited supply of it, and we have to be strategic with how we use it.
Could you say that there's burnout in maybe through protecting your peace and, you know, giving those block times, that's how you have managed to not have burnout?
Yeah, I think burnout is a very real issue. It's a very real problem. Like, academia is not unique in this way. Burnout is a huge problem just across fields and across work, because, you know, we very much live in a society that values working all the time, sometimes to your detriment, right? So I think, though, that burnout is a huge issue, particularly on that pre-tenured line of things, because you're working towards a goal that has a specific end date, and you've got some idea about what you have to do to achieve it, but there's still enough murkiness that it means that realistically your brain can constantly just be like, I have to work all the time. That's the only way that I can make it, right? So because that's a message that's out there, whether it's true or not, burnout is a huge issue. And so being aware of that, and I will say, I now 4 or so years in, I'm way better at that than I was 2 years ago, which is just a better understanding of, I cannot possibly achieve the goals that I have if I don't create space and breaks and time for myself. It just is not feasible. So it is an issue. It is an ongoing thing that I at least continue to work on. And I think that it's true of most people that if you are a person who has that kind of high achieving, you want to always do better, do well, you want to please everybody and make sure that everybody's happy, there just has to be that recognition that you got to pump the brakes, because it is the only way that you're actually ever going to be able to accomplish those goals.
Yeah. I know that at least with being a student is different, but it's also the same, because you want to, do the best, especially if you have somebody paying for your degree. It's like, I can't say for everyone because everyone has their own, their own opinion. But for me, having somebody pay for my degree, it's like, okay, I got to work. I got to make sure I get these certain grades. Even for scholarships, I have to work and make sure I get a certain GPA. But I think through that, students, we sometimes lose ourselves and don't take a step back to be like, okay, let me just breathe. Because even being a student, that's burnout, especially if you're going like 50 miles a minute, because if you have your classes that you're going to, and then you have a job that you're going to. And for me, I did research on the side, and I also had 3 other jobs that I had to cater to. There was a lot of burnout, but I did not notice it until like I went to sleep one day and was like, okay, once I wake up, I was like, wow, I need to trail back and take some time for me. So burnout is a thing. And take time.
It is such a thing. And I think you hit on such an important point too. There's that constant balance. And I will say I certainly feel it being on the other side, having been given opportunities that were not available to my parents, and certainly not to my grandparents, or anybody before that in my family. And also being the beneficiary of scholarships and people's work and people's charity in some senses of donating and doing all of these things, and even being the recipient of people's emotional support along the way. I feel a huge responsibility to do well with all that I've been given. And I do think, though, one thing that's really important to keep in mind, that the only way, if we're playing a long game, which is what I hope we're doing, right? Playing the long game in your career, a long game in what you want to be doing, that the key to longevity is being responsible with that time and energy.
What would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your job?
The most rewarding. I'm going to cheat, because I'm going to break it into domains. So I would say overall, the most rewarding part to me is the teaching / mentorship part. Like, I really value I just really value the opportunity to talk to students, whether it's in the classroom or in the research realm, and like
me, she was my professor.
And I really value getting the chance to bear witness to their ideas developing and kind of seeing the passion continue to grow. I just think that is, I'm in such a fortunate position to be able to share in that and to kind of help people navigate the pathway that's going to lead them to where they want to go. So I value that a ton. And so that is the most rewarding, when I continue to be able to talk to students and people that I've worked with years ago, and to be able to say, this little nugget stuck and I'm doing the thing that I wanted to do. And it's so incredibly meaningful to me. And then on the research side, I think one of the most valuable pieces to me is when we can, I don't want to say shed light, because I don't want to say like I'm the only person doing the work that I'm doing, but it's just really nice to be able to translate people's experiences into something that people can read and have it be tangible, and have it, to be able to compile these people's experiences and tell a story that is true to to what they've gone through and open it up to the broader scientific community to say, like, this is an issue, here's what's going on. I have really appreciated being able to play a part in that, with the hope that it actually changes how people move through the world and experience hardships in particular. I've had a couple of opportunities based on the research that I've done to, participate in campaigns or participate in fact sheets that go out to patients and things like that, just to take the stuff that is amorphous and turn it into something tangible that's actually useful. I only want to do research that is useful. I want it to have practical implications. I want people to be able to do something with it. So when I get the chance to see that something can be done based on a piece of something I've done, it's really rewarding.
I know a lot of people think, as we're talking there, like, they may think of the scientific research that's like, drawing blood and all these different like experiments and stuff that you see on TV. But there's so many aspects to research, you all. It is different in psychology. And there's also this thing called code of ethics, where that doesn't happen anymore. And in order to do research, as Dr. Adams is speaking about, it's like research with surveys. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel, blah, blah, blah. Or you get a group of people and I guess I'm trying to think of our research. We did like, you get a group of people and you talk to them about something, and then they will act on something else. So it's like behavioral. You're trying to see if you change a portion of what you ask them to do, how does that affect them, and how does that affect their behavior? So there's different aspects to research. I just wanted to put that in there. And then also, kind of to sum up what you said about your different paths, I think another part to the teaching realm, as you already mentioned, is the mentorship. I can say that although, I'm not your grad student at all, and I'm in a different program, you definitely helped me in a way of just looking through articles differently, in like a different sense. In our class and in our conversations, we had like conversations that I would have never thought about, especially the whole Monopoly game thing. That was so iconic. I loved it. She had us do Monopoly, but with a twist. So we had a scenario of like being rather a Latina or a Latino, and then a black man or a black woman, and then obviously Caucasian man, Caucasian woman, and then different uh, tiers to that. So if you had health insurance or no health insurance, if you lived in, what was it, like poverty or something?
Rural or urban or suburban.
Exactly. And then how that also played into the scenarios that she read. So like, well, if you have health insurance, you don't have health insurance anymore. You have to pay for blah, blah, blah. So like just those games and just influence in the classroom is very important. And again, I can say through that mentorship, it's different for everybody, but for me, through that mentorship, I appreciate the work that you've done. So thank you.
I really
and then the
appreciate
research
that.
and then the research part of it, going back to what you said translating people's stories into actual like data for people to basically take and make sense of it, but also make it useful. I think that's another part of, again, psychology research that we are trying to do. So again, it's not what you see on TV, it's completely different. And through those research, through those surveys, through those experiments, a good takeaway from it would be you're helping somebody or you're helping a group, especially like unrepresented groups such as the LGBTQ plus community, the Black and Brown community, in the communities within those two subsets. So thank you again for that as well.
Thank you. You summed it up so beautifully. And I will say, if I like, that is one of my favorite class periods ever. I look forward to it every time I teach that class because it's amazing how frustrated everybody gets in the Monopoly game. It's wonderful for me. No offense.
I
I just
mean,
love seeing it.
I would hope it's wonderful for you, but for me playing it, I was very frustrated because I might have gotten like $500, then I have to spend it on insurance, and then I had to like pay somebody for rent. Like it was just regular Monopoly on top of the scenario. So I was frustrated, but thanks to the classmate that was trying to help us out, like there's two of us that were struggling during the game. And it was like, I mean, I can help y'all out. Y'all could pay me back later. And we were like, no. At least for me, I was like, no, I'm going to win. And I still lost, but that's okay. What has surprised you throughout your time in rather research and or being a professor? Like, were there challenges that you had to overcome, such as weekends that you didn't want to work, long hours, things like that?
Yeah. So I would say, I don't know if I'm surprised by it, but that it is just something that is a truism. It is just true that I have friends who are in other fields who, 5 o'clock comes, they turn the computer off, it's done. The weekend comes, they wake up, it's their time, it's what they want to do. Whereas
Yeah.
I think the nature of academia, the nature of running your own research, all of these kinds of things, means that you could always be working. You really could. I could always be reading, I could always be writing, I could always be doing something in that realm. And so I think something that has surprised me was just, again, that kind of explicit need to create those boundaries and to reinforce and implement them, because really you could always be working, and like we've talked about, that's not a healthy or sustainable approach. I think a thing that has also surprised me more specifically in research is, I think because of the nature of the kind of clinical work that I do, which is, or have done, which is typically in more medical settings, working in hospitals and things, it's meant that I have often worked alongside people who are not psychologists. So I've often worked alongside doctors and nurses and social workers and people just in all kinds of different allied health professions and just other kinds of professions. And I've been really pleasantly surprised by how much I think my research has been aided by those experiences, and that some of my closest collaborators are not psychologists. They're people who have no background in psychology whatsoever, but we are approaching the same problems from different lenses. And I have really valued that opportunity to like sit and take stock of a big issue and hear multiple perspectives and see the ways in which my psychology brain approaches something which is totally different than my close friend and collaborator who's an epidemiologist and the way his brain goes. And it's just really reinforced that nobody is working, if you're working on issues related to living, issues related to life, these are not single field, single domain problems. And it really does require multiple perspectives. And I think I am frequently surprised because, I'm trained to be a clinical psychologist and I know the ways in which, I work clinically, but I'm frequently surprised by the ways in which your training really do dictate how you view issues, right? And how you view problems. And so I try to maintain that awareness, because while I think that it's super helpful, I have a very specific approach as a psychologist, as a person trained in this field. It also means that it is one perspective and other people have other perspectives that they bring in. And so I really value that opportunity to work alongside people whose perspectives are totally different than mine, but we can work together because we're trying to solve the same problem.
Even through, collaborating with others, do you ever find challenges through collaboration?
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. It's frequently, right? Like it's frequently a case where we're actually describing the same things, but our fields use different words. And so, so that is an issue, but sometimes it really is a truly different perspective and different approach. And, I view that not as a problem, but more as just something to think about, something to work through, because who's to say that because I'm trained a certain way that my perspective is the right one, right? Like, I think it's right, but it might not actually be. And because we know all of these issues are multi-component, multifaceted, of course, people are going to come in at different angles. So we have to be able to work together as teams and really work to understand where each of us is coming from. And I think that through that work is one of the ways too that we translate people's experiences into something that is actually a good representation that has been able to be looked at from all of these different approaches.
So on the point of translating through experiences, have you ever had a situation where one of your jobs like couldn't work with your family schedule? So meaning, does your job ever interfere with your personal life?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really, really good question. I think to some degree, yes. And to some degree, no. Look at you. I've read The Psychologist giving you not easy yes, no answers. One of the things, so I've talked about how this particular job, and again, I'm thinking really specific to academic tenure track kind of placement. I've talked about how it's easy for things to bleed over and for that schedule to kind of be overrun with work. The flip side of that is I am so fortunate, and a lot of people in academia are so fortunate to have flexibility. Like, aside from set schedules for teaching, a lot of this is your own calibrating your schedule and setting it up the way that you want to set it up. So some people start working at like 5 a.m. and they do it that way. Other people start working at like 11 a.m. and work later in the day. There is a lot of flexibility in this kind of career path, which is really nice. But like I said, there is also the possibility for deadlines to come up, particularly around if you're submitting grants. Many people end up working a ton in the weeks leading up to submitting grants because it's such a big task. So yeah, I mean, that can certainly happen. Over the spring, my father passed away suddenly, and I was still teaching. So those kinds of things happen where you can't necessarily, those kinds of things can happen where you can't necessarily just stop doing what you're doing. But so I think it's a mixed bag. I think that what you benefit from by the flexibility can sometimes be a real challenge when there are immovable things that happen. But like a lot of jobs and like a lot of places where you work with people for a prolonged period of time, there's also a sense of community that can be built up where people can support you that you work with. So I think in that way, it's probably not that different from a lot of jobs that, there's just work. Work is work.
It sounds like, at least being a professor, the track it works with your schedule. What about for the research aspect or job?
Yeah. So I will also put out the caveat, and this is a huge caveat. I do not have children. So I will say that particularly, and this is an issue, and it's come up actually a lot in this last year with COVID and everything that has happened related to that. That the setup of the tenure track is not always seen as particularly friendly, particularly to people who are also parenting young children. And so specifically like with COVID and having to take care of, your kids schooling in the house while you're also trying to do your research and teach and do all of these kinds of things.
Yeah.
It really, I think this year has just brought to light an issue that we've known has been around for a long time, but has really just smacked us all in the face within this last year. So my experience of being able to have more flexibility and craft that is really also a product of the fact that I do not have any children. Research, it depends the kind of research that you do, right? So sometimes if you're doing, I have good friends who do research that focuses on suicide prevention and suicide intervention. Those folks, if you're actively running a research study that incorporates that, you might be on call to address any kind of imminent risk situations that can emerge, and that could be any time, right? So that means that when you are running your study, you might always you have to be available to do some kind of risk assessment or something like that. For a lot of the work that I do, it is much more focused on, it's less focused on kind of imminent risk. And so I can start and stop. It is, it gets a little bit wonky when you are scheduling interviews with people. So I have a project that hopefully will start up this spring. And so that means that schedules have to be, my schedule needs to be open because I am at the mercy of other people's schedules and I need them. They don't need me. And so, in that realm, it sometimes means that research can get in the way at times of other tasks that you have or other things in life that you have going on. Like I said, if you're in a grant deadline, that is often evenings and weekends in the weeks, maybe even months leading up to it being submitted. But again, that is more of how people end up doing it rather than that's how it has to be done.
When did you decide that this was something you wanted to do?
So I decided, I was really kind of on the fence. I had viewed myself as working in more of an academic medical center where I would be maintaining my clinical responsibilities and still like seeing patients and also doing research, by like being affiliated with the hospital and doing research that was more hospital based. And it was really, I think, right around in postdoc when I was just reflecting on all of my experiences and reflecting on my education and the wonderful mentorship that I had, but also the gaps in that mentorship, that I really did start to think back and consider what would I miss if I did this kind of career path versus another one. And so I really started to just reflect on I want to say 2 Black professors that I had, 2 Black teachers that I had growing up in a very diverse area. I grew up in Northern Virginia and in Maryland. And I just thought back to, it would have been so nice. It would have been so nice along the way to have had more Black faculty, to have been able to highlight specific issues that I was facing along the way, and just to have that representation, because I think I did not know that what I am doing was really a possibility for me to do until I was already in graduate school, right? So I feel like that's a little bit late. And it would have been nice to have that kind of possibility and just to see that earlier in my time. And so I thought about what it was that I really, really valued. And that mentorship teaching part was really high on my list, along with the research part. And I thought, okay, maybe this is what I should do. So I was not a person who was kind of all in from the very beginning that I would be in a standard academic environment. But I think it really does map onto a lot of the things that I value.
Did you have anyone to mentor you or guide you through your path? Because you said that when you were, younger in school, you didn't really have many Black teachers. So was there anyone there to mentor you and guide you through your path as well?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of really wonderful mentors along the way who, even if they didn't speak exactly to what I wanted to do, they were people that I could talk to and that I always felt had my best interests in mind. So I'm thinking about people from my undergrad. I'm thinking about people from my grad program at Mason, right? I'm thinking like Dr. June Tangney, like these people who I always felt like I could be honest about where my passions were and where they weren't, and could just knock those ideas along the way. So I was really fortunate in that capacity. And I would say to anybody who is unsure or isn't quite, they're like, maybe I could talk to this person, but I don't know. And I'm nervous too, and all of that kind of stuff. I would say reach out, right? Even if it is not that person that you end up talking to, they might be able to connect you to somebody else who is a good person for you to know, and who, even if they're not doing exactly what it is that you want to do, it's nice to have somebody that bounce those ideas off of. And I would say multiple mentors is nice. It can be challenging. It can be challenging, but it's just, there are so many paths, so many possibilities, which is really an excellent, good situation to be in, but also incredibly overwhelming, just so hard. And so to be able to talk to somebody who's a little bit further ahead of you, or way farther ahead of you, is a nice thing to capitalize on and take advantage of, because they can at least chat you through some of the things that you might want to consider.
I can say with my personal experience, I think I only had, four Black female professors, and you were one of them. And through each one, you all were mentors to me. I worked with one, her name is Angelique. She was a graduate professor, and then we became really close. Shout out to Angelique, love you, girl.
Yes, I sent her an email this morning.
I love her. She has been my, I believe since rather the second part of my freshman year or the first part of my sophomore year, she has been my mentor throughout college. And yes, although our career paths are different and we're still working underneath psychology, this woman is blessed, amazing, amazing, amazing work. And I believe that mentorship is what gets you through each of your paths. Even like you said, even if you guys don't have the same interest or speak about the same thing, and they can just direct you to somebody else that they know, that is important because it just pushes you further into where you want to be in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're describing too is one of the things that it makes my heart just so happy, because I'm thinking about the long chains of development, right? I'm thinking, I have been a mentor to Angelique. Angelique has been a mentor to you. You will be a mentor to somebody else. And just to see that pathway, yeah, definitely, to see that path just continue to go. And I've been mentored by other people, right? So it's just this unbroken path of support that I just think is so important and so beautiful. It just makes me really happy.
What are some strategies that you have found to work for you through the professional environment as a woman of color?
Oh, yes, yes. Support. So having mentors, and this is a place where for me, falling back on the idea they don't have to be exactly in your area, because my area, we don't have a lot. And so it has meant reaching out to people who are also professors and also early career and later career professors, who are Black women in particular, has been helpful for me. But even if they haven't been Black women, if they've been people that I can talk to about the structural and social dynamics that happen in the academic space, that has been critical, to just have that place where you can say what's going on and truly get it out.
Black women support Black women. We love that.
That's right. That's right. I would also say I frequently reflect on why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I think we can get into a space that's really kind of automated, right? Like so much of what we do is just automatic. We know, you look on your calendar, you're like, okay, I'm doing this. Okay, now I'm doing that. But I like to sit back and ask myself, like, what is actually my higher purpose of doing this? Like, what am I really doing? And I have found it helpful to reevaluate and reflect on what my values are. So I have found that anytime I'm feeling particularly discontent, or if I'm feeling just unsettled about what's going on in my professional space, it has been that in some way I am starting to veer, I feel like I'm starting to veer away from my values of what I am trying to do. And so that frequent check-in is one of the ways that I have been able to just keep going and keep feeling comfortable about what I'm doing, and to know that I'm on the path that feels authentic to me. So I would say support, and I would say value checking.
Where can viewers find more information about whether research as a career or professor academia field?
Yeah. So I would say where you are, if you're in school, usually many people will have, like professors will have a blurb about the kind of work that they do. And people like talking about what they do. So if you're interested, if you're reading what people are doing and you have some interest in it, I would say reach out. Reach out to see if they have opportunities in their lab. Reach out, read their articles, right? Like that's one thing that you can do, just by checking out that blurb of what they have going on. You can get a sense, I think you can kind of get a sense of a researcher based on reading their work. You get a sense of not only the content, you get a sense of kind of their style, you get a sense of the kind of work that they do, right? Is it experiments? Is it surveys? Is it interviews? I would say probably have to do a couple, because if you do several different things, you're not going to get that whole sense from one. But I would say, yeah, I would go directly to the source. That's one of the biggest benefits you have as a student in a university setting, is you have access to like science in a way that you do not have once you leave. So many journals and journal articles are not publicly accessible, which is a problem. So many of these things are behind paywalls, and you have access to them because you are a student. And I would say to take advantage of that, take advantage of being able to read the articles directly. I know that sounds like, why do I want to read another article? But but you really do have opportunities and access to science directly in a way that you just will be unlikely to have unless you are working in a university or like an academic medical setting. Otherwise, it is really rare to be able to directly go to the source in the way that you can when you're in a university. So I would say start off with web pages and then start off reading articles and reaching out directly to the people who are in your department or in an area that you are interested in learning more about.
Sound good. I don't like to read articles all the time, as you know. The last project, I told her that I didn't read any of the articles, but that's okay. I still passed the class, so that was good. So the last question that I leave for last, specifically just to sum up your whole experience, I call this little part of the interview Shy's Threes. So how would you describe your career experience in 3 words?
Ooh.
Think long and hard.
Yeah, this is hard. Okay, 3 words. I mean, I think 1, truthfully, challenging. I think another one is rewarding. So challenging and rewarding for sure. I'm trying not to cheat by taking like meaningful, which is very similar to rewarding.
2, 1 more. You got this.
I consider this different than rewarding. So I will say, I will say purposeful. Like I think, and I'm saying purposeful because I think it reflects both the kind of work that I'm doing. Like I think like it has a purpose.
Yeah.
And then I also would say that as it relates to the specific choices I've made along the way, I have been, I've tried to be strategic along the way and, you know, thoughtful about the decisions I've made at different points in my career so far. So yeah, I would say challenging, rewarding, and purposeful.
To sum up her whole career experience, I love it. But those are all the questions that I have. And thank you again, Dr. Adams. I love you. Thank you again for joining me today. And do you have any other advice for anyone looking into this career that you just want to spit out in maybe like 1 second, 1 sentence?
I would just say, do what sparks your passion, to just go for it and reach out, ask questions. You know, there's no harm in gathering more information. Gathering information doesn't mean that you have to do that thing. It just means that you're more informed about it. So go for it.
Knowledge is power, everyone. Well, thank you again. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel to get updated videos. And also please follow us on social media. Thank you, Dr. Adams. I love you, girl.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was my pleasure. And stay in touch.
Of course.